Okay, now it's 10:03 and we all three panelists are here now. So I'm going to get started now. Welcome to this webinar on Has the Pandemic Changed the Way We Grow Effectively as Leader? My name is Sunjin Kim. I'm going to be the moderator for today's webinar. So you will be able to submit questions anytime for our speakers in the chat or using the Q&A. And make sure sending them to either everyone or directly me, Sunjin Kim. Yes, if you send your question directly to your speaker, they may not notice that because they might be speaking, okay? And so today we have three great panelists, the Claude Perry at Estalas, and then Grant Wallerat and the IntelliSense, and then Eric Pulkustenis and FV. Okay, and here is outline of the today's webinar. First, the speakers going to introduce themselves and also their company and then their environment. Then you can know them more. Then next, we're going to discuss two topics. And first topic is how does your life change at work before and after pandemic? And how did the pandemic make an impact on your team and work? And second topic we're going to discuss is how can we be more successful in this new world, and what skill become more important after pandemic. And at the end, we have the Q&A session. But at the beginning, as I told you, you can submit your question anytime. Then I'm going to deliver the question to our panelist. Okay, so now Claude, could you start introducing yourself? I'm stop sharing my screen.
Sure. So I do have a few slides. No, not that it's a PowerPoint meeting, but I think it's going to help. Can you see them?
Not yet.
Share. Share.
Yes.
Okay. So let me put full screen. So just to introduce myself a little bit, so I'm Claude Petit, and I'm leading the statistical and real-world data science at Astellas. And I will say a few words about Astellas after that. I've been working in Europe and US. So I started in France and then moved to US about 15 years ago. So I think that gives me the interesting side that I have two very different culture and maybe two different ways of looking at things. From a work responsibility, I'm in a management role, so I'm still reviewing some technical work, but really my work is about creating a vision and alignment and making sure that the team is getting through all the changes and all the uncertainties right now and remove barrier when we have, something that's kind of blocking the system. I've been with Astellas for almost 2 years. I joined in October 2021. And I'm working remotely, so fully remote from Connecticut, knowing that the headquarters for Astellas are in Chicago. So it's a 2 hours flight to get there. What I'm interested in, so I'm really interested in coaching, mentoring, and teaching. That's something I've always done. And I think it's very refreshing to keep this connection with younger people and people working in different fields as well. And I'm also a member of LIPCOM, which is a committee that is really a link between ASA and BIOP, and is interested in leadership and coaching and mentoring. And in addition to that, I'm also a mom and a breast cancer survivor. So that also keeps me busy in addition to everything else. Astellas, I don't want to, say a lot about Astellas, but some of you may not know. It's a pharma company. The headquarters are in Japan. It's a Japanese company, but the headquarters in the US are in Chicago. And I would say it's a mid-sized company. And what's very interesting is that Astellas is working in non-typical, I would say, therapeutic area. So as you can see there, genetic regulation and some immuno-oncology, blindness, mitochondria, and targeted protein degradation. So every drug that we work on is a first-in-class. So, and it's usually in some kind of indication that's not very well known. So I think that's a little bit different sometimes. From a geographic point of view, as I was telling you, so we are a Japanese company, so a lot of things are ongoing in Japan, but it's also for M&D, the headquarters are in the US. So we also have a lot of R&D and M&D offices in US, and we also have a few in Europe. And just to give you an idea a little bit about, where people are, you can see that 25% are in the US, 33% in Japan, and then we have established market, which is mostly Europe, Canada, Australia, we have 23%. And we are kind of balanced by gender. What I wanted to say today, because it's related to what we are going to discuss. So Astellas has decided to be a fully remote company. So of course, some jobs you cannot be remote, but for all the jobs where you can be remote, and that includes, of course, statisticians, data science, and all these people, were fully remote, meaning that people can work from anywhere in the US. We still have some building in Chicago, but people usually go for meetings and trainings and to meet with each other, but most of the work is done remotely. I think it's it's a choice that the company has made after the pandemic, based on the fact that during the pandemic it went really well, and it gives us the opportunity to really have people everywhere in US, because we can hire in any state. So it gives some freedom from that point of view. So I think for the discussion today, I'll be coming from the point of view that it's feasible to work completely remote. Of course, it has pros and cons, but I also want to show you the graph right there, which is, I think after the pandemic, a lot of people ask themselves questions. And really what we are paying attention to now at Astellas is really the mental health and happiness, and the no stress and calming environment. And so linked with that, we also have adopted a very flexible schedule, so that people can, of course, if you have meetings, you have to be in these meetings, but otherwise you can organize yourself the way you want. We work globally, so you may have early meetings, late meetings, but otherwise you can work in a very flexible way, and you are accountable for deliverables, and we trust that people can achieve that. So that's what I had to say about myself and Astellas, and I'll stop.
Thank you, Claude. And then Grant.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Seongjin, and thanks everyone for joining. So my name is Grant Weller. I am Senior Vice President of Data Science at BioIntelliSense. Actually, I saw the bio was missed in my bio, but that's all right. So just by way of background, I did a PhD in statistics in 2013. Colorado State University, spent a little time in academia, and then moved to industry. First with United Health Group, where I led statistics and data science group in the R&D division of United Health, which had a few different names, but eventually came to be called Optum Labs. And then in 2021, so post start of the pandemic, I left and switched positions, and I'm now currently at BioIntelliSense, which is a medical device and remote patient monitoring startup. So we manufacture these devices. They're called BioButtons, small wearable patches that go on the chest, and they capture heart rate, respiratory rate, a number of other biometrics on the chest in maybe a similar way you might think like a Fitbit or Apple Watch does. But because it's attached more to the core of the body, we can measure more parameters, and also have medical grade FDA cleared accuracy on our devices. So my role is less about the hardware, the devices themselves, and more around how do we interpret and understand the data that is coming off of these devices in the context of healthcare. So whether that be a patient who is in the hospital being monitored, how do we understand kind of their vital signs, and in particular, we're interested in trends in vital signs and changes, and what that might mean for a patient's status, and whether that patient may need attention from a healthcare provider. So whether that patient is in the hospital, which is one set of customers of ours, or increasingly the patient might be at home, having just recently left the hospital, and their care team wishes to monitor them, make sure they're okay, prevent them ideally from coming back to the hospital, and having a bad experience, and imposing additional cost on the healthcare system. And so my team's role is really on the development of all of the algorithms, and also more kind of scientific, analyses and publications that we work on developing about our device and what we're able to do with the device. And I additionally, in my role, I oversee not just what we call our data science team, but also our data platform, or our data engineering team. So the folks that are actually building the tools that allow the data scientists to do their work most efficiently. So maybe a little bit different perspective than the other panelists, because I work for a small company. It's only about 100 employees. We're venture capital backed and funded, and have grown. We've actually grown quite a bit during the pandemic, or during the post-pandemic period, which means we've grown remotely. And so our team is very distributed, not only within the US, but actually globally. And so I've had a lot of interesting experiences and learnings from working with a highly distributed remote team. I'm looking forward to discussing more today.
Thank you, Grant. And now, Eric, could you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, Eric Polk-Stennis. I work at AbbVie, which is a top 10 pharmaceutical company. Been there about 5 years. I had a group called Data and Statistical Sciences, which is statistical sciences. There's a data science analytics team, data management, which is the acquisition of data, management of it for all our clinical studies, statistical programming as well. Prior to that, I've worked at small, medium, and large companies, and I appreciate the benefits and sort of trade-offs of each of those. Over the years, I tended to be interested in kind of three main areas of like career development. One is just individual leadership. How do any of us show up as human beings to any situation and influence, lead? Why is the world different, or the team different, or the conversation different because we're in the room, right? Next, execution. How do we get things done? Process, technology, efficiency. How do statisticians who are sort of quantitative mathematical subject matter experts evolve to master other areas, especially around the discipline of process and operations and things like that? And then lastly, I've got an interest in innovation, like all of you probably do. How do we create the future But for me, I think, how do we do this amidst all the noise and all of the activity? Where do we find and create value? So we're talking a little bit about the pandemic today, how it impacted our environment, leadership, et cetera. I think in some ways it introduced challenges and opportunities. The biggest challenge, obviously, that we had was business continuity. What is this new world we found ourselves in? You're all probably asking the same thing. What's just happened? What do we do? How much risk are we carrying? Where is that risk? And by the way, how do we work now? Where do we work? What do we do? What's going to happen to me personally? What's going to happen to my company? Everything was sort of on the table, and it was a very interesting experience with, I think, lots of leadership opportunities. My company is currently in a hybrid state, which means that we come in the office about 3 days a week. They're trying to split the difference, right? Get the best of both worlds with some remoteness, some on-siteness, and obviously there's trade-offs that all of you are familiar with. And the playing field's changed, right? So I think the remit for all of us, regardless of industry, is, how do we deliver our business? How do we develop ourselves within a changing playing field?
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Eric. Yes. And so now the audience don't know the panelists more, and we start to discuss the topics. And so I just copy and paste our questions. The panelists will discuss in our chat. The first question is, how does your life change at work before and after pandemic? And how did the pandemic make an impact on your team and work? And so in this discussion, our panelists going to interact each other, and then they may jump in or add their more comment, and after the one speak about their experience. Okay, who want to start? Share your experience or your thought.
So maybe I'll start.
Okay.
The thing that was so interesting about the pandemic, in my view, is the magnitude was huge. And it happened so fast. I think over the period of like 1 month, the entire world changed. Everyone, I think, was thinking about, is my business even going to survive? Is my family going to survive? Do I have to go wash the Amazon packages on the front porch? And by the way, I've got a team at work, and what are we even doing? And I think that jarring experience that we all had, I sort of think about that, and I think about the leadership. Okay, how do we show up, and how do you even think about how to show up in something like that? I think that was sort of the challenge, that we had. So that was what was striking to me.
Yeah, for me, I was managing at the time a small team of about 10 or so folks, and it was really fascinating to see. I was in a healthcare company, so I'd like to think that we kind of knew a little bit more than maybe a typical company or someone in other industries might. But the reality is, none of us really knew anything about what was happening, to Eric's point. And it was kind of interesting to see you could tell different people you interacted with what their level of concern or fear was, where there were some folks who really truly didn't want to leave their house at all, and very understandably, were just concerned about exposure and risk, and maybe they had a relative who had a chronic condition or was at higher risk. And then on the other end, there were some people who were just like, I hate being at home, like I want to get out of here, I want to come into the office. And so that poses, as Eric said, a really interesting leadership challenge, where you kind of have to, number one, just empathize and understand that everybody's kind of at different points and perspectives on this. And then, secondly, to try to address the concerns, whether it is like concern about leaving their house or concern about not leaving their house. And then also try to be productive in that kind of environment, right? And so I think it was really for me, I think my instinct went to, safety first and foremost, kind of before any other need can be met. And so making sure that everybody felt comfortable enough and safe enough and could find a productive working environment in order to be able to to get anything done, and recognizing, I think also that might take some trial and error, and it might take some time to kind of figure out, how do I work most effectively, or where do I feel most secure and safe, and and trying to provide the information, the best information that I had at the time, with support of what the company messaging is, but also adding in your personalized perspective, knowing your employees and kind of where their feelings were at about it. So that was one thing I tried to do, was to kind of be very hands-on, personalized, depending on where each individual was in terms of their thinking.
Yeah. So for me, just to add to that, I think the pandemic really changed my life, not just my professional life, but my private life too, because before the pandemic, I was traveling a lot. So spending a lot of time on planes, in meetings, always trying to catch up with emails at night, people trying to connect with me, and with 20 messages on my phone. But I was thinking that was a way to communicate and be connected with people, was to have many face-to-face, which meant a lot of travel and a lot of time in meetings. And of course, the pandemic stopped that. And to my big surprise, actually, instead of becoming more distant with people, I think we became a lot closer, and the connection and the communication actually increased. So it was a big surprise, because I was really not expecting that. I think if I had known that before, I would have traveled a lot less in my life. But people became very concerned about each other's and taking care of each other's, and communication was very short, but almost daily communication. And really, I think I got to know people during the pandemic, like in a much deeper way than what I knew before, because people also had private issues, and it was, as a leader, it was my job to make their life easier, and so to understand for each of them what the obstacles were. And by doing that, people opened up, were very transparent, and shared sometimes their life, and we found great solutions. So it's I really see a lot of positive in this pandemic. I don't, of course, not for all the people who were sick and lost their life, but from a professional point of view, for me, it really opened my eyes and brought a lot of positives.
Thank you, panelists, to answer your question. And here is some question from our attendees. And the first question I want to ask you is, what aspect of your interaction at work have been most changed in the remote work setting?
I can answer that one. I think it's a pretty easy one, which is meetings and how interactions in meetings go. I feel that when you're remote, it's all over video, right? Zoom or Teams or whatever technology you may have, and most of the time, with the exception of with some of colleagues and coworkers who maybe I'm closer to, meetings I think meetings are generally very structured, but I feel they get even more structured when it's on video, on Zoom or on Teams. And it's almost to the point in some cases where I feel like, okay, we're talking about the topic and discussing back and forth, but are we really kind of connecting and getting to like a shared level of understanding on the subject? And I think that is more challenging over Zoom than it is in person, where previously, if I was in the office with somebody, maybe we'd even go out and like take a little walk and discuss the topic, and just the subtleties of in-person interaction just seem to facilitate a more natural and interactive, experience, kind of getting on the same page. You might be the phrase to use, and that's just, I think, inherently more challenging with video meetings, at least in my experience. Now, ways to I think try to address that. I've tried, starting meetings with, just chit chat, small talk kind of thing, trying to connect more like, like they would say around the water cooler at the office. Even potentially having some times where it is just let's just have a quick call for no reason, just to catch up or connect, like in one-on-ones. But overall, I would say that kind of the challenge of meetings would be the biggest change for me personally.
Grant, I'd agree with that. And I think that one of the things that's worth thinking about is, how do we change how we show up at these meetings, right? Do we just sit at our computer just like we would try to do it like a regular meeting? Are we aware of the differences that the new environment brings? And I think about things like, okay, how do you read a room? How do you read a room when some folks may not have their cameras on? How do you or me, how do we be more effective, right? I mean, certainly only one person can kind of speak at a time. It's tough to have like a real back and forth dialogue, some of these video calls, so clarity is probably really much more important. Monologuing, right? Or being confusing is probably, people have a lot less patience for it. Maybe they check out sooner, right? So bringing our A game there, maybe being more observant. You probably have to listen a lot harder, I think, in a virtual type of setting, to understand the conversation and follow what's happening, the real conversation that's taking place. And then, of course, what have you got? You've got all the offline that takes place, right? People texting each other, hey, do you agree with this? Or hey, I have to let you know that this one issue might come up. But I see that as almost like a meeting within the meeting, where every once in a while it actually can help move the ball forward, and so it's just a new skill set. But it's one, I think, that first and foremost, we just have to realize we're playing a new game. It's a different type of meeting. There's different opportunities, different challenges. But I'd agree, that's the playing field that's changed the most for me also.
So follow question about this question is, any specific strategy to facilitating the communication and maintain the productivity in remote work setting?
Yeah, so maybe I can give a few examples there. So before, because most of my meetings were face-to-face, I must say, when we had video conferences, it was usually boring and not very entertaining. When I had to switch to only video conferences, I actually started to use a lot of different tools to involve people in the meeting and make the meetings a lot more interactive. So like with polling questions, with word clouds, with things like that. And actually the feedback was that people felt more involved in the meeting being remote than they were when we were sitting in the same room as I was, which was interesting. And they felt also that we were really asking them what they think and really involving them and really care about them. So I think it's really possible to build all that remote, but you need to be well prepared. You need to have the right tools, and you need to be able to captivate, I would say, the audience, so that the people are not multitasking or doing something else during the meetings.
Thank you. And also there's a question like about what the cloud talk about this mental and issue and mental health. And could you answer the question, Claude?
Yeah, so I think, with the pandemic, people were paying more attention to each other's. At least that's what I have observed. And people very quickly, it was obvious that the pandemic was not going to impact everybody at the same level. So it was going from single people alone in their house, very isolated, and having depression, to young moms having to deal with young kids and no daycare and no school, to people who had elderly parents who were sick and dying alone at the hospital. So I think people became even more aware that we had one thing left, which was take care of each other's and be there for each other's. And the teams almost naturally started organizing themselves to kind of fill the gaps. And when someone was not there, somebody else would do it. When in the past, I felt I had to organize that, but it became just very natural. And so this sense of belonging and being together in the same, hardship and having to get over it, I think that's what really was a success.
Eric and Grant, do you want to add something?
To the question, that it's kind of on one hand it sounds kind of trivial, but on the other hand, as I was thinking about the question, I kind of thought about this in our company, which was every Wednesday we do we get a credit for lunch on DoorDash. And so because everybody's remote, but everybody can go into their DoorDash, get lunch, order it, the company pays for it. And in the past, we've even had Zoom meetings or Teams meetings open just to chat at lunch, which sometimes a lot of people come, sometimes just a few, and it's a really small thing, and low cost to the company. But things like that, at least for some folks, I think are really exciting and helpful. So even sometimes those little things can help.
Okay, then now there's one more question here. What have you found helpful in improving clarity and cut down miscommunication?
I feel like communication is so important. And I don't know if the major principles are really any different, whether it's pandemic or not. I think that listening to the speaker you're responding to and understanding exactly what they're saying. If someone asks a question, actually answering the question that's been asked, bringing information and communicating it with clarity and accuracy, these kinds of things. And so I think communication really has not really changed a lot in terms of the requirements. Maybe it's even more important, like with the virtual setting, less room for error, so to speak, because people get confused and you go back and forth. But I think really those core principles of good communication skills are still unchanged. Maybe I could add one thing. I think someone mentioned it, but probably calling people out and inviting them into the conversation is even more important in this setting. Hey, so-and-so, could you weigh in on this? What do you think about this conversation? What would your advice be? How would you guide us through this? Because if you're virtual, it takes a little more courage to, kind of step onto the screen and you're the only speaker and off you go. Of course, you can raise your hand and that makes it a little bit less because then people invite you in. But just as a kind of running a meeting or even having a meeting, I think that bringing other folks into it and inviting them in and asking them to what their opinions are, I think is something that's pretty well received. And in person, it's the same. But I think online, maybe it's a little bit more of a purposeful activity.
Yeah, I wanted to second that as well. I think it's very easy for someone to kind of be be ignored or maybe to disappear in some ways when you're working remotely, particularly in the context of meetings where there's multiple people. And especially if you're an introvert like I am. I mean, my natural instinct is to not speak unless, you know, it's clearly my turn or my area of something. But that doesn't mean that, you know, the extroverts only have the good ideas and the introverts don't have the good ideas. So I think, you know, it's important as leaders to make sure that people are heard and have an opportunity to speak. And on the other side of it, I think it is important for everyone who works remotely, no matter what your level is, to be proactive about being heard and seen, maybe even more than might feel comfortable sometimes, because, you know, that's unfortunately sometimes a reality of humans, as we, you know, those making noise get attention, get listened to. And so, you know, I think it's a good thing to be mindful of and to be proactive, especially if that's not your default kind of way of communicating and operating.
Thank you, Grant. And in the chat, there's two similar questions, and I want to just record that Cloud and Grant, they are working in the completely remote environment, and Eric is in the working hybrid work environment. And so there's two questions, they're almost same. So any plan of going hybrid at your company, or there's incentive about that, or would you like to do you prefer to work in hybrid environment, or any chance to return back to the office environment?
So maybe I can start. So for me personally, I really like the remote setting. I must say that's my preference. You know, the way Astellas did it is they actually asked people what they wanted and what was their preference as well. And of course, it's different by country and by type of job. And so we do have some flexibility. And if people want to go in the office, they can, but they don't have to. But the big plus I've seen is that, and for me, that's the main difference between, let's say, a one-day hybrid setting and a completely remote, is that if you're completely remote, you can really have people work everywhere. If you're just one-day hybrid, well, if you have to fly for this one day to the headquarters every week, then that makes it very impossible. So what I like with the remote is that it's a much more diverse environment, because people who had obstacles, you know, to work with you, either because of location or their family life or whatever, now they don't have the obstacles anymore and they have the same chances. So that's what I really like. I think my team has become a lot more diverse since we are fully remote.
Yeah, I would add from our perspective, I don't think, even if we wanted to, it would be feasible to go to hybrid or fully office, because we are so distributed and it just wouldn't be practical for us. We have considered, you know, over the last few years, you know, for folks that do live near one of our offices, to bring them back into the office. But one time we planned to do it, and then the Omicron wave hit, and then the second time we tried to do it, it didn't really gain traction. In part because I think there's kind of a critical mass minimum that's really needed for it to be, you know, worth the time and effective. You know, you don't want to go into the office and be the only person there. That's not a good use of your commuting time. And so certainly I could see it possibly happening if we were to grow or, you know, become acquired or something like that. But for the foreseeable future, it seems we'll be remote. Now, I will add personally, I actually would prefer a more hybrid environment. In the past, in my experiences, I've really enjoyed being in the office and around other people, but it's evolved to the point, for me and my family, that I don't think I would even do that 5 days a week. I would maybe do 3 days a week if I had the option. I feel like that might be a good balance.
Eric, do you want to add anything on this topic?
I love being remote. I'm not remote, I'm hybrid, but I love working remotely. And I think folks can be extremely effective at it. Your meeting stops and you're instantly in your next meeting. Like, think about the not wandering around the buildings and stuff. So I think that, there's pros and cons. I come to work here and sometimes I run into someone I haven't seen. You have a 30-second conversation and you learn like really good information. Like, oh my gosh, there's project, something's going on, and maybe you can connect somebody with somebody else. So it's all trade-offs. I just try to embrace, the benefits of whatever environment I'm in on that given day. And I'm not worried too much about the trade-offs.
Thank you. And there's one last question before we move to the next topic. And actually, I'm also very interested in your answer to this question, because I heard that from my friend, and they actually have Zoom meeting, but none of the colleague actually turn on the video when the meeting. And so there's a question: how important is it to you for remote meeting participant to be on camera?
Depends what time of day it is for them, right?
Go ahead.
I was kind of making a joke. It just depends what time of day it is for them, right? My quick answer is I try to encourage it. I try to be on video most of the time with my team, but I don't require it. I understand there are some people that just don't want to be on camera, and sometimes people are on camera, but are maybe busy or travel. Like, even sometimes people take a call in the car, and understand those situations. But I've found usually that if one or two people kind of take the lead and turn their video on, most people will end up turning their video on a call.
Hey, Cloud, do you guys have a policy at your company, given you're fully remote and a pretty big company, or no?
I wouldn't say we have a policy, but let's say we are highly, strongly encouraged to be on camera. So of course, if it's a big meeting, you have 200 people, then it doesn't make sense. But all my team meetings, as Grant just said, I'm always the first one to turn on my camera. And so usually, because I do it, people will do it as well. Sometimes people are like, no, it's too early or it's too late, and I'm in pajamas and things like that. That's okay. But I think it really helps to see people, it's not just about what they say, it's also about their face, and you see if they're tired, you see if something is going on. So I really like the camera.
Yes. So I think that the camera is quite important for me, because usually when I teach in the online class, and then sometimes I feel that I'm the person who only talk, and then they're all black screen, and I feel very frustrated. And when I teach, anyway. Then there's actually one more question, but because now we discussed this one for almost 30 minutes, I want to move on to the next topic, and then I'm going to go. And Greg, please understand, I will ask your question after the second topic. Okay. So second topic is about the skill set. Definitely, we are living the new world, and so we need a different skill set to be more successful. And so how can we be successful in the new world, and what skill become more important, and what skill become less important in your career? Anybody want to begin?
Feel like the skills are the same skills, but they're just changing a little bit, right? So emotional intelligence, that's always important. But how does it change? Emotional intelligence is kind of knowing yourself, understanding others, and then the ability to take action in response to that. So it changes when you're in a virtual setting, or when you haven't talked to somebody, or when there's, communications over email and things like that. You don't have that face-to-face type of contact. And so it maybe has to be deployed in a different way. We talked a little bit about communication skills. How do you read a virtual room? How do you read a virtual room when someone's camera's not on? And so there's challenges there. But I've heard people talk about virtual meetings and they say, oh, did you see that someone was chatting during the call? And I didn't see they were chatting. And they were chatting to that other face over there. And these two people were communicating. You can see people having a conversation, and then they're sort of aligning. And so there's a lot of data when you look at all the faces on the screen, because I hear people using it, and I haven't really become a pro at doing that, but I know that people are doing it, and they're kind of understanding who's on board or who's not on board, things like that. I do think that probably one other skill I'd highlight is like our own personal presence or brand, or who we are, reputation, as we're trying to develop ourselves as employees and leaders and contributors. Probably we have to work a little harder, I'm assuming, because we're divided, right? We don't get maybe as much face time with certain people. You don't run into certain people. The networking may be harder. You may have to work harder to make sure you're connecting with certain folks. But I think that being more proactive in establishing ourselves on our career trajectory with respect to visibility is probably something that could use some attention.
Yeah, so maybe to add to that, I think communication has always been key. But of course, in a remote setting, it's even more important to be a good communicator and a good listener as well, because you can only communicate well if you're listening to what people are saying, which sometimes is not that obvious. But for me, the difference is you have to be a little bit more intentional, I think, because in the past, like what you said, Eric, you were in the hallway and meet someone and they tell you something. Well, that's not happening anymore. So all the random meetings and random things do not happen. So you kind of have to find ways to reproduce that, the random water cooler, the random going to the bathroom and seeing someone. So I think it's a little bit different. You need different techniques, but again, it's feasible and there are pros and cons, but I feel like I have to be a little bit more intentional. Like if I haven't spoken to someone for maybe 1 or 2 weeks, I'm going to put, a note on my desk saying, hey, call this one because I haven't heard about them, want to know how they're doing. And as in a face-to-face meeting, some people are much more loud and present than others. So I want to make sure I don't forget anyone, that people do not get ignored and are not visible anymore.
Yeah, I think those are great great skills to mention. The only thing I would add is I think time management, but not in the way you might think of like, oh, I'm working versus not working. I think it's more just understanding and being focused on, okay, what am I like today when I'm working, what am I trying to get done? What are my goals? Because it sometimes can be not clear when especially if you're working remotely and you've been working at home for the last 4 weeks now, and maybe haven't had as much interaction with other folks, kind of holding oneself, I think, accountable to say, okay, here's what I need to deliver, here's what I need to work on, focus on that. And the good thing about working from home is you have a bunch of flexibility that if that needs to be done at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night instead of 2 in the afternoon, a lot of times you have the ability to do that, but you also need to, you still need to make sure that that's happening and getting done. And when we're in the office, at least for me, you know, the office sort of creates an environment and a mindset where you're just checking stuff off, getting stuff done, focused. And then that doesn't necessarily translate to the home or to a remote work environment. So for example, one of the things I've done is set up my little space here, which I only work down here. I don't do anything else. You know, it's pretty isolated from the rest of the house and quiet, which helps me kind of know, you know, when I'm in this environment, this is what I'm working on, focused on work. Doesn't mean I can't go upstairs and help out with something with the family for 10 minutes if something comes up, or, you know, whatever it may be. Also doesn't mean I couldn't, you know, do something on my laptop later in the evening if I need to. But I think kind of managing time is perhaps a skill that is has a higher level of importance and requires maybe a little more attention than it used to in the old world.
Yeah, I think maybe something else I wanted to add. So because we're completely remote, what we've decided to do is at least once a year have a face-to-face meeting in Chicago, and we bring everybody there for a week. So we spend 5 days together, and really you realize that this face-to-face time becomes very precious because it's not happening all the time. And so people really make the most of this time and really spend a lot of time together and a lot of social time. And so I think if you're completely remote, you still need to find ways for people to meet with each other face to face. I would say at least once a year, if not twice a year, because some people, they had never seen each other. You know, they were hired during the pandemic. They had never seen the building. They had never. So I think that's very important. So for me, that's really the recipe for success, is that sometimes people have to come together and not be always remote.
Okay. Okay. And there's a question about what aspect of the leadership became less important in pandemic.
So I'm not going to answer this. I'm going to answer this indirectly. I think that there's like an adherence to tradition, status quo, maintaining order. You know, the pandemic blew all that up, right? And I think it really showed us that, because we had to, it showed us that we can change things dramatically and still be okay. And so maybe if there's an aspect of leadership that feels good about order, or feels good about, you know, kind of maintaining continuity. I mean, there's advantages, obviously, and you have to do certain things like that, but it just pushed us all into places where we had to kind of adapt on the fly, and we succeeded as a human race. Yeah, we really have succeeded in this, and it has been kind of fun to see some of the new dynamics, even though they bring some challenges sometimes. I want to go back to one of the other questions, maybe just a comment. And I think that, Grant, I've heard this in your commentary, and also Cloud, just this idea of sort of like kind of seeing people differently, caring about people a little bit. I love seeing people at home and like watching their kids fly in and their pets like run across the screen. And it's like, it takes off the mask, right? We're all human beings. We all do all the same things. We wonder if we can like fly to the bathroom before our next meeting, or perchance during a meeting, and maybe no one will notice. Like it's just life. And I think that seeing people with a little bit more of a relaxed way, or a little more real, authentic way, I think has been good for everybody, actually. And so that's been, I think, an advantage of the virtual life.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you mentioned it. I think the old school leaders, the top-down leaders who, are super polished and don't have no flaws and present this image of themselves that maybe was a 80s, 90s thing. I think that is long gone for sure with the pandemic and the way work has evolved.
There's a couple of interesting questions, and Nancy asked, would you say trusting your team to do their work has become more important since you don't see them on a daily basis?
Absolutely, for me, yes.
Yeah, I must say, I always, my first reaction is to trust people. So unless they give me a reason to not trust them, I trust them. But where I'm very happy is that I think people have proven that they can be trusted, and that they did not let anything, fall between the cracks. They work really hard. They found solutions to deal with their private life and their professional life. And I don't think there is one leader in the world now who can say that you need to micromanage people to make sure they work, because everybody has proven that they are reliable and they should be trusted. So that makes me very happy, because that's what I was thinking before the pandemic, but now I can prove it with numbers and facts. And I don't think it can be discussed anymore.
Okay, sounds good. And there's another question, and I think the panelists, they mentioned that still communication skill is quite important, and also Grant mentioned time management is important, but they still want more specific skill they can pick up to make their self and their employee more successful. So do you want to add any more skill and training and anything?
I'll add one thought. I always say sort of careers are made up of moments, and some moments are more important than others. And the pandemic was a moment for every person to freeze, not do anything, to withdraw, to step into a situation they didn't understand and still try to help their company or their community or whatever it was. So I think I would just give the reminder that when something special, even in a bad way, happens, like a pandemic, it is an opportunity to lead, to influence, to distinguish yourself, to prove value, and to make your company, an organization, like better, and your team members better around you. So, just embrace it. Just embrace it and look for those moments in your own career where things are happening in your company. They may not be as dramatic as a pandemic, but there's always a little drama floating around, and see those moments and shine during those moments. And that's when you can really establish yourself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, then I think that we discussed enough about the skill set, and here is one question we didn't answer from the last topic. So what challenges do you face with workers spread across the country or world? And how did you try to resolve the challenges?
I can take that one pretty quickly here. I know we're coming to the end of the time. It certainly is a challenge with hours, asynchronous hours. So we do rely a lot on asynchronous communication, which for us, it's either Slack or Teams, those types of messaging platforms we use pretty extensively as a company. Beyond that, it does require some, just flexibility with, when synchronous communication is required, to, I'll meet early in the morning, and I know my colleagues will sometimes meet late at night in their time. So, some of what we do there is to actually have kind of dedicated times of the week or hours where it's, hey, I'm available and you're available and we overlap, and so let's talk if we need to. That's typically the, you know, what we found worked well for us. But for sure, heavily reliant on asynchronous communication, and just, you know, similarly, again, trust, right? You know, I'm not there to see if somebody is working, you know, at 3 p.m. their time because it's 2 a.m. my time and I'm sleeping. Obviously, you know, we all trust each other that we're working to get things done.
Yeah, so I can't agree more with that. Working for a Japanese company and being located in the US, the time difference is just killing everybody. Because sometimes you need to be in the same meeting at the same time. And of course, it's always inconvenient for someone. And sometimes it's even inconvenient for everybody. So we're trying to minimize that and be flexible and find solutions. But if there is one thing I could change, if everybody could be in the same time zone, you know, that would be amazing, because it's really complicated and it has an impact on people's life. And I hate it, you know, when you asking people to sacrifice their family dinner to be in a meeting. I think it's not fair. But there's no other way.
So the grant, the mention about the lunch, yes, the company pay the lunch for the employee, but that is only feasible for the company, yeah, relatively small company. Then like Eric, you from the big company, really big company, and could you answer this question from the Donna?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think there's something special about small companies that really lend themselves to community and culture and connection. And I've worked for a small company before and I've experienced that. And you can try to, I think, capture some of that at larger companies by having a healthy culture and, you know, different ways to connect. But it's not quite the same. But what I think we've done is, you know, try to just break things down into like smaller pieces. So you might have a project team, you might have someone that manages, you know, 4 or 5 people, and they can always get together. So different kind of groupings of employees and different activities, you know, I think can be designed, you know, and you can get bigger, you know, you can have a big picnic or something like that, you know, on some afternoon. Of course, takes some planning and effort. But you're right. I think that the smaller companies are just so geared to be able to do that. And the bigger companies try to do the best they can, largely just maybe kind of segmenting into smaller units of people. If you did the DoorDash or the Grubhub at a big company, you would just have like everybody ordering food and like sitting at their desks and not talking to anybody. It would be, you know, maybe some people would, I don't know what the lineup of cars outside would look like, but that's a cool perk, Grant.
Okay. And also there's a very interesting question, and it might be the last question. And what aspect of your leadership style are you currently working on and developing?
Okay, so I think there are many aspects of my leadership that I can improve. But one, I think, is really to make sure, that's what a little bit what I was saying before, is to make sure I do not forget anyone. So really remind myself when I'm on the call, and to, like Eric was saying, maybe call out some people, make sure everybody has a chance to express themselves.
Yes.
So listen to people and make sure everybody's included.
It's quite a good point. Eric?
I would say, kind of answering this from an organizational leadership standpoint, I think a lot about how do you like push or drive a group or organization to be better in certain ways without like alienating them. There's like a tension between those two. So if you're the leader that goes in and you just give love and warmth, they're going to love you so much, but they may not like reach their ultimate potential, right? And so it's a little bit like that coach. It's very much like the coach of a team. You know, there's some coaches that yell and scream, and everybody hates them. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. There's some coaches that are just players coaches, and but are they really, you know, as good as they can be? And so I just think a lot about can you have both? And I think you can have both. But this idea of really helping and challenging people and holding them accountable and showing them the way a little bit and giving them a chance and rewarding them, you know, and helping them ultimately get there to achieve their potential. And at the same time, kind of bringing them along around. So at the end of the day, they say, man, that was a tough learning experience, but I'm so much better now. I'm so glad that I went through that project, or, you know, oh my gosh, I did this and my boss wasn't really pleased with it, but we iterated a little bit and now I understand what I need to do when I show up in these moments. So kind of making that whole positive experience. I sort of think about that once in a while.
That's a great skill. It's one thing I'm also working on. And I think the other thing I'll add to that is, how can I, in this remote work setting, environment setting, how can I actually make my team members, you know, help them grow to, you know, I would say take on more responsibilities, more duties, almost thinking about how can they become a replacement for me someday, or be to that level of qualification. And I think that is more difficult for me, it seems, remotely than it is in person, in part because when you're remote, you only have a certain amount of time with people on meetings and you're often focused on the task at hand. But trying to be thoughtful and mindful of, you know, where can I push somebody, you know, to get a new experience or a new opportunity that challenges them, kind of maybe is even in some ways something that's a little above their pay grade, to give them kind of an experience or a flavor of that, while also, you know, supporting and being there as the backup to, you know, to help them move along. I think that's something I'm you know, mindful of in the remote work setting.
Thank you, Grant. So now it's time is 2:11. So I think it's time to finish today's webinar. So before I finish today's webinar, I'd like to say thanks to our panelists for sharing your great insight and the experience. And also I would like to say thanks to our audience, and they ask very great questions and also participate a lot. So thank you so much. And I hope you guys have a nice weekend. And thank you again. And thank you for attending today's webinar. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.